Today I'm going to be talking about 3 things you can do to help paint better mountains. Today we are taking a look at how to paint mountains in oil. And there's 3 keys to remember when painting mountains. The first one is simplify the shape by using a shadow pattern and light pattern. Number 2 is focus on showing 3 dimensions. And number 3 is use neutral colors of warm and cool temperature. So let's look at some paintings. I gathered some different artists painting mountains. This one is Edgar Payne. Might be one of the best at painting mountains. And you can see here, mountains can be difficult because there's just so much going on in them. So the number 1 key is to simplify the shape. Decide what's important and leave the rest out. And what's important is the big, simple, dark, and light shapes, because that shows the form of the mountain and it shows what the light is doing to the mountain. And that's the most important thing. And if you get no farther than that, then your mountains will always work on some level. And you can see here, he's got dark and light shape in the snow on the mountains, and then a simple dark and light shape on the rock part of the mountains. Now he's got some other colors later that he added into the shadow and into the light. But he's simplified the form to show the simple dark and light pattern of both snow and rock on the mountain. And then 2, he's really made it look 3-dimensional. In other words, if we could lay a red ribbon, if you had a giant 10-mile long red ribbon, and you could lay it on the mountain, it would follow the form, something like this. It would show the form if you lay it on there. And if you're not getting enough dark and light pattern in the right shapes, your mountains will look flat. There won't be enough form to them. So think about the big shapes, the big forms first, but then there's also some smaller forms, like in here, dark and light pattern. You can see there has to show kind of a staircase look here, or stepping down from one shape to the other. That this rock or part of the mountain is in front of that part, and then the snow is behind that. So there's layering, there's overlapping, dark and light shapes, and a variety of shapes too. And this is the hard part, because you don't want to get caught up in the detail, but you want enough variety to make it look interesting. And I think he does that really well. This is very simplified, I think, from what he was looking at, but there's enough in there to keep it interesting. And using the dark and light shapes, he shows what the light is doing, and he showed the form. Plus, he's focusing on making it look 3-dimensional. Let's look at another Edgar Payne here. Now he's got 2 layers. He's got the background mountain, which is cooler, more on the blue side. Then he's got the foreground mountain, which is warmer, more on the burnt sienna side. And that is showing some depth. Aside from the fact that he's overlapping the foreground mountain in front of the background, it shows depth by getting the shadows lighter and cooler. And again, I didn't do it on this one, but if you laid down a red ribbon or laid something on top of the form, it would follow this form really well. So he's showing good form. He's really being conscious of making it look 3-dimensional. And I think that just takes some practice doing. I would rather not get the shape exactly like I see it, but get it looking really 3-dimensional. So don't worry about copying the mountain exactly. I want to kind of get the essence of it, or the main idea of it, but I don't need to copy everything exactly. I want to focus on making it look 3-dimensional. with the dark and light shadow patterns and the warm and cool neutral colors. So another one here. This is Charles Partridge Adams. He was a Colorado painter in the late 19th century, early 20th. Great job of just the drama of throwing the foreground and shadow, and then the dark and light pattern on the mountains with the cloud kind of moving in front, made possible with these really soft edges here. Then the edges get a little bit harder right in here. But he's got a simplified dark and light pattern, and he has value changes that show the form, and then the warm neutral color in the light area and the cooler neutral color in the shadow. Now some of that shadow just goes almost pure blue. He used a lot of strong color in his painting. So he wasn't one to use much neutral colors, but you can see the neutral color here. And this is a neutral color of orange and violet, or yellow and violet, or orange and blue. Hard to tell what he used, but it is a neutral color. And what I mean by a neutral color is that it's taking the color and moving it towards the gray aspect. So this is gray, but it's a warm gray. There's probably a bit more orange and or yellow in it. And the shadows are a cool gray or neutral, a bit more blue or blue-violet in it to keep it in the shadow. And that's the temperature, the warm and cool, the warm lights, the cool darks. And you put them next to each other and they create the effect of sunlight. But it's the values that show the form. And how much detail to add, like he's got a few details of cracks in here, is something you just learn by messing up a lot of paintings, by doing too much detail. Then you do paintings where you realize you don't have enough detail in them. Eventually you find the happy medium. So here's what I mean by neutral colors. And usually I'm using complementary colors when I paint mountains. So the mountains are going to be either violet, this is a dioxazine purple, and cad yellow. And you mix them together, and in the middle it becomes neutral. It's kind of gray. In other words, that's what I mean by neutral. As colors move grayer, they become neutral. So I don't want necessarily a pure gray color, but I want a grayish color. So in the shadows, I'm going to have it a bit more on the violet side, but I'll be using the cad yellow to gray it. And in the light areas, I want it more on the yellow side, but I'll be using the violet to make it more muted or grayer. So they're neutral colors. Not necessarily neutral gray in the sense that they're just a flat gray. There is color to them and temperature. And when you mix grays, if you have temperature in them, warm and cool, you're going to have color in the grays. They won't just be a flat gray. And that's what I'm after. And you can see this is more orange and blue right here in the light areas on the mountains. And over here, it's more blue with orange. So the orange and blue in the lighter, warmer, and then blue with a little orange in the shadow. And the shadow's a lot cooler, light area is a lot warmer. And that's the blue and orange complement. You can also think of mixing complements with a particular modifier. In other words, a kind of an earth color or a color that modifies the color, that grays it down, moves it more towards a neutral idea. And this is burnt sienna. So I have burnt sienna over here, ultramarine blue here. And both of them have a little bit of white in them. They're not straight from the tube. It is here though. And then as I mix them together, it's going to get grayer. And if I keep it darker and more on the blue side, this makes some nice shadows. More on the light side, I'll have more burnt sienna, a little less blue, but some more white to get it lighter. And this is going to be warmer. So that warm and cool contrast really helps set those off. Now let's look at a photograph here. This is a photograph of the Tetons, Teton National Park. And this is a midday photograph. So the shadows are a little flat. I've got some shadow pattern in here that's real definite, but it's just spots instead of a big pattern like you would have like here. It's got bigger pattern because the sun is lower and you have bigger, simpler patterns of dark and light. That's a little easier to paint. Harder to paint in midday when things go a little flat. But I want to force a shadow pattern in there anyway. So what I do, and when we look at the photograph, you can see we have rocks and trees and snow. I didn't mess with the snow, but we have rocks and trees on here, some grass. So I want a dark and light in the rocks and a dark and light in the trees. And that's when I turn this black and white. So I got 2 values in the rocks and 2 values in the trees. And I'm forcing a bit more of a pattern of shadow here on the rock. Same thing on the trees, a bit more shadow pattern. Instead of the light coming straight down directly like it is in the photograph, I'm having it come a little bit from the left, just to have a bit more of a shadow pattern. So I'm using what I see in the photograph or outside if I'm painting outside. I'm using what I see as a starting point, but not a place where I have to stay. So when I see this, I want to create a more definite shadow pattern that helps the form stand out better. Then this foreground hill is in front of the Rocky Mountain. This Rocky Mountain is in front of the background Rocky Mountain. And things overlap and come forward or go back. And the 2 or 3 values in each big shape shows the form. And again, the big key is to be able to look at it and simplify it. And that's what I've done here. I've simplified the values to that. Now, I also want to show a 3-dimensional, the idea of, again, if we laid a big ribbon down, how that ribbon would follow the shape. And I want to paint the value changes enough that it shows that shape. And you don't get that with detail. Too much detail will kill that big, simple, dark and light pattern. This is about all I would want to do value-wise. I could vary the color a lot more, have a lot more color variation. But again, I've got 2 values in the trees, maybe 3 values, I guess. And then 2 values in the rocks. Probably have 3 values in the trees there just to show the foreground trees and background trees. But I'm trying to force everything into 2 values in the trees, the rocks. If I had put the snow in, I would have the same thing, 2 values. That simplifies everything. Now I can always come back in the finish of the painting and add a 3rd value in the shadow or a 3rd value in the light. But at least I'm really being aware of starting with simple values and then being careful how many more values I add. I don't want to add too many values. It kills the big shapes, the big dark and light shapes. Here's another Edgar Payne. Very nice. Very simple. He's not trying to be fancy with the brush strokes in here. He's got a pattern of dark rock against the lighter shadow snow. But he's got 2 values in the snow, 2 values in the rock, and 2 values in the trees. Simple shapes, simple values. I don't know, this looks like a smaller painting. I don't know that it is, but maybe one he did outside. This is another Charles Partridge Adams. I really liked his work. His color's a lot stronger. But you can see the mountains are more simple than some of these other mountains in these paintings. A simple shadow pattern for the foreground mountain and then a little bit of sunlight. So a blue to blue violet for the shadow and a lighter blue to green in the light area. Then in the background, it's a more muted, warm, and a grayer shadow as it moves into the mountain. But the shape is very important. The shape makes the mountains either interesting or not, the dark and light shapes. So be careful with the shape. Don't just make a simple A shape or, a bunch of triangles for mountains. Really look at the shapes. And Edgar Payne did that really well. They're nice, interesting shapes. And when you see the shapes in terms of shadow pattern and light pattern, it makes it easier to set it up. And there's not much technique here. He's just slapping down dark and light shapes, keeping the right value contrast between the dark and the light, and the temperature. He's got kind of a grayed orange and then a real grayish blue in the shadow. So gray orange lighter in the lights and a darker muted blue in the shadow. This is one by Conrad Schering. He was a 20th century Schering, I think was his name. 20th century painter, painted in Teton Mountains. Had a studio, I think, in Jackson Hole for a lot of years, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, I think, too. But great job with the neutral colors. Again, the warm grays, orange and blue, I would guess. You could use black and orange, blue and burnt sienna, yellow and violet. Those are all somewhat complementary, or close to being complements. And while he's got a lot of busyness in this mountain, he does have a simple dark, a simple light, and then he's chopped it up with a little bit of halftone in there. It's not as detailed as it looks. He just kind of chopped in some different values, keeping the brushwork very, very loose. But again, it has that feel of 3 dimensions to it. This is another Charles Partridge Adams. You can see the sunlight up in here. Sunlit snow and sunlit rock, and then shadowed rock and shadowed snow. Pretty close value with the shadow and the sunlit snow, but if we were to make this into a black and white, I think it would show the shadow darker. I always tend to make them a lot darker than what I think, just to get the contrast, because the contrast between the dark and light is very important. Here's another photograph of some mountains near Cody, Wyoming. Not as dramatic, but there's still that shape in there. And again, if we could lay our giant red ribbon down, it should follow the form. And that's what you want to think about when you're designing the shapes and using the 2 dark and light patterns of shapes to set up the mountains. And then value-wise, just simplify the values. Turn this to a black and white and just get the value change. Now, I'm eliminating a lot of detail. There's a lot of subtlety in the rocks and in the trees. But if you can see it like this first, it's going to be a lot easier to paint. Easier to get everything blocked in, filled in. Then you can come back at the end of the painting and add some subtle value changes within the shadow or within the light, but don't overdo it. The more simple you can keep it, the better. I've got some of my paintings here. It's a small little 12 by 16. Again, I've got 2 values in the shadow, the rock shadow and the snow shadow. Then I have the sunlit snow and the sunlit rock. So those simple patterns and shapes, 4 values to set up the mountain, and keeping it as simple as possible. Now I came back in the muted bluish snow shadow color, adding some oranges, some violets, some greens. They're all the same value, so they don't stand out much at all, but they just add a little color variation. You can see the color variation also in the grass, but you can do that in the mountains as well. And here I'm using violet with some orange, and then orange with some violet in the light area. They're kind of neutral. The violet shadow is pretty strong, moving towards kind of a neutral color of orange and violet. Here's another one here. This is in Colorado. And I've got a lot of layers here. The first layer with the aspens, and I got another layer here where the trees start, and then background layers. And I'm trying to see a simple dark and light. In the shadow here, I've got a dark rock, dark trees, and dark aspen color. Then I've got a shadow for the aspen, or for the pine trees. Same thing in here. I've got a light pine tree color and a dark pine tree color. And then a light grass, light aspen, dark aspen. Simplify those shapes. That's the most important stage, is simplifying your subject with thumbnail drawings, small little color sketches. See how much you can eliminate detail and just paint what's important and what helps the painting have, again, those 3 things: the simplified shape, using shadow pattern and light pattern, focusing on showing 3 dimensions, and using neutral colors of warm and cool. This is another one. I'm using burnt sienna and blue. So I've got white and burnt sienna. Probably don't have much blue in this white and burnt sienna, these lights on the rocks, because that's so much white that the white kills the burnt sienna. Now the shadow, I've got blue, and I've gradually added the burnt sienna in there until I came up with this darker, cooler, muted color. Same thing with the snow. It's blue and orange, and the sunlit snow is just white and orange. Again, there's enough white that it kills the orange, but it's still warm. and then a muted blue, probably blue and a little bit of burnt sienna or yellow ochre, and then blue again in the shadow with more blue, less white, and a little bit of orange or yellow ochre. It's almost bluish green, but not quite. But you can see the simple dark and light shapes. It's a small little color sketch, but just trying to keep the shapes very simple. Simple shape, simple value. Focus on making it look three-dimensional. Despite what the photograph gives me or what I see when I'm out there, do what it takes to make it look three-dimensional. So you're thinking past the photograph to make it work better. Here I've got mountains that are kind of going back in space. They're not just straight across, they're slightly pointed back at an angle. I wanted to show that. And here the trees just at the base of the mountains are more detailed. And then as the trees go back, they get more and more simple till I'm just seeing pattern of yellow and green, dark and light. Trying to keep it very, very simple. And the mountains are snow covered, so it's probably white and yellow ochre with a little bit of blue, not much, and then white and blue with just a tiny bit of ochre or burnt sienna. If it was ochre, it'd be a bit more on the green side. So, and then a muted blue here in the background trees. The key here is to get these foreground trees dark enough that these background trees really stay back in the distance. Here's a scene in Tucson, and the mountains are a bit more craggy, more rocky. The foliage and shrubbery is here kind of in the lower foreground mountains. So I've got a simple pattern of violet and burnt sienna. Got a lot of violet in there. I might have started with blue and burnt sienna for the shadows and then came back and scrubbed in a little violet. And then orange and blue for the sunlit areas, or burnt sienna and blue. Then coming back with a little bit of orange or yellow in some of the cliffs. But the colors are moving towards a neutral color, a warm and a cool neutral. They're not strong color. You just don't have a lot of strong color in mountains. Here I'm using orange and blue for the shadow and light pattern. And having these hills, really rounded. Again, if we're to lay something down across this, it should follow the form of these hills. That's what I'm trying to show, is just the three-dimensional look. These hills are coming forward. These mountains are staying in the background. These mountains are staying further back in here. Here's a smaller one where I used a lot of palette knife to lay the paint in very quick, but because I wanted the brush strokes looser, but it's still simple dark and light shapes. I might have a little color variation in the shadow, but it's still a simple shadow, a simple light. I did add a halftone to the snowy areas that are rounded because they're more in the middle value than they are in the light value. Now they are light, they're in the sunlight, but they're not catching as much light as these sheer cliffs. So those are the lighter, these are the more halftone. So I have three values now, the light, the halftone, then the shadow. And that shows the form a lot better. Here I've kept the mountains as simple as possible and the color a bit stronger. The blues in the pine trees are a lot stronger here. I wanted to push the blue and the orange tree contrast, that complementary color contrast, to create more drama in the painting. And lastly, this is a painting in Crested Butte. Again, you can see the shadow here falls along the shape of the mountain. So the shadow kind of emphasizes the shape, the three-dimensional look. Now this is a more complicated, because there's a lot more complicated scene because there's a lot going on, but there's still dark and light trees on the mountain, dark and light rock, and some dark and light aspens. And that's really about it, those 6 values. Get those blocked in real simple first, then you can come back and put some detail. I hope that was helpful. Remember the 3 keys: simplifying the shape, using shadow pattern and light pattern, focusing on showing 3 dimensions, and using neutral colors of warm and cool.